Welcome to the Small Business Update. I'm Jeanette Mulvey, the Editor-in-Chief of CO from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The Biden administration is encouraging businesses to offer paid time off for employees to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Small businesses that offer the benefit could have their costs offset by tax credits, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We're here to break down this new plan and explain what it means for you and your employees. I'm joined today by Andy Slavitt, Senior Advisor to the White House COVID-19 response team, and he's here to share his insights on how you can tap into this opportunity to help your employees get vaccinated. I'm also joined by Neil Bradley from the U.S. Chamber, who can answer your questions about this relief program and others available to you. I'll be taking your questions for Neil at the end of the session, so be sure to type your questions into the space on the right-hand side of your screen throughout the event. We have more questions coming in than we can possibly answer, so there are moderators working behind the scenes to ensure that the most popular questions are the ones published. If you see your question listed as pending, don't worry, they're working to get to each question. So let's get started. Thank you for joining me, Andy and Neil.
Good to be with you, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to start with you, Andy. President Biden has initiated a new tax credit for businesses with fewer than 500 employees who will pay their employees for time off to get vaccinated and to recover from the vaccine if they need that time. So just tell me broadly, what was the thinking behind this decision and why this was important?
Well, I think we're in a pretty important, pivotal, and fortunate position. We have 3 working vaccines that have been given to close to 140 million Americans. They're highly effective. They're highly safe. If people do their homework on them, I think more often than not, they will find that it's the right thing to do. So we're getting all the right information out there. So let me just tell you where we are right now in the process. Over 80% of seniors have taken the vaccine, and yet we are now beginning to work towards getting working age people vaccinated. Everybody's eligible, schedules are open, there's plenty of walk-in opportunities, there's a vaccine within 5 miles of 90% of Americans, so that's the good news. But we only have about 45% or so of working age Americans vaccinated. So one of the things that we understand is that people need to be able to know they can get vaccinated without losing time off of work. And so this is really what allows that to happen. People are also very influenced by you, their employers, and want to know that people around them are safely and effectively taking the vaccine. So we're really calling on businesses a call to action to really help us get to the next leg. If we do that successfully and we can get anywhere even remotely close to where we are with seniors, then we are going to be in really good position to move past this pandemic. So it's a great opportunity to take advantage of this tax incentive, give your employees time off if they get for getting the vaccine, and if they feel mildly under the weather.
Great. Thank you, Andy. So Neil, these tax credits can be a little bit confusing for small businesses sometimes. So Neil, tell us the particulars of how a business would claim this tax credit.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jeanette. And I just want to applaud Andy and the whole team there. You know, one of the things that we've said all along at the U.S. Chambers, we're going to get our economy back going again, fully open and operational when we can beat COVID. And the key to beating COVID is vaccines. And so every barrier that we can eliminate to people getting vaccinated just brings us that much closer to a healthier society and a healthier economy. With specific reference to this tax credit, this is an expansion of a tax credit that was actually enacted in March of last year as part of the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act. Congress came in and provided a refundable tax credit for small businesses to keep paying employees if the employee became sick because of COVID, or had to quarantine because they had been exposed, or extended paid family leave if the employee had to take care of a loved one who had been afflicted with COVID, or had to take care of a child whose school or daycare was closed. Now, fast forward to the bill that President Biden just signed into law and this expansion. One of the things it did was it added vaccination time off. that if a small business gives their employee time off to get vaccinated, that counts for what you can receive this tax credit for. The tax credit's administered by the IRS. The Biden administration last week put out a really helpful 2-page fact sheet that walks you through how it works. But in short, as an employer, this is a refundable tax credit. You get to hold back what you would normally deposit as federal income taxes, Medicare, Social Security, payroll taxes, withholding to offset your tax liability. And then you file what's called Form 941 that shows that you kept that money to offset your costs of providing this paid leave.
So this is not something that you need to file for separately. It's part of that filing as well.
Yeah, so this all counts against your quarterly withholding payments. So as every employer knows, so you pay your employees, you also have to remit to the federal government the taxes that you've been withholding, those Social Security and Medicare payroll taxes, as well as the federal income taxes. This is a refundable tax credit against those payroll taxes, and in particular against that Medicare tax. But what it allows you as an employer to do is say, hey, I had 50 employees. I gave them all, let's say, 4 hours of time off to go get vaccinated. Here's what I would have paid them during that period, what I did pay them because it's paid time off. Here's the value that I receive in that tax credit. And you can just simply keep part of those payroll tax withholdings that you would have otherwise remitted to the government.
Got it. Thank you, Neil. So Andy, in addition to these tax credits, the administration has suggested that businesses take what is kind of a unique approach to encouraging their employees and even their customers to encourage them to get vaccinated, things like discounts and promotions. So I kind of want to ask you a 2-part question. One, the first part is, why is this the role of private business? And just what do you see the value of private business in doing this? And then I'm going to ask you from some examples of what you're seeing that's working.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I mean, a lot of this has sprung up organically. Kroger has reported to us they had about 50% of their employees vaccinated. They decided to offer $100, I think it was a gift card, for employees who got vaccinated, and the enrollment increased to 75%. And then we've since seen that with many other employers. But it's not just with employees. People are doing things for customers. There's a small hair cutter salon in Ohio that President Biden referred to publicly last week, that as people were leaving their appointment, they volunteered to make appointments for people and their families, and they ended up making over 200 appointments for people and getting them vaccinated. Uber and Lyft are driving people free to vaccination sites to get vaccinated. And so there's been a study out which shows that, and of course there's the famous, I think, Krispy Kreme that are offering free donuts for people who've been vaccinated, certainly a favorite of many. So there's a study out which shows that there's a lot of favorable brand that comes from this. But why it's important, I think, is really interesting. I think people are more likely to get vaccinated when they know other people that are vaccinated, when people in their community are vaccinated, when their fellow employees are vaccinated, when they could talk to people they know about it. So just the whole culture. And it's important that it comes out from the government. I think people, think that the government has an interest in whether they get vaccinated or not. So people want to make their own decisions. They want to do their own homework. And so things like this get them engaged, they get them to pay attention. Of course, they make their own decisions at the end of the day, and they shouldn't be punished for not making that decision. But an incentive that helps them make that decision, it turns out, is highly effective. A governor just told me that they're giving Powerball tickets to people who take the vaccine. So all those kinds of things seem to be pretty effective.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're saying is there's a fine distinction between enticing people to do it with incentives as opposed to requiring, and that sounds like what you're seeing is that people respond better to the enticements than requirements.
There's a lot of positivity here. I mean, this is a vaccine that's been under development for a couple of decades. It's a success story for basic science. It's a success story for public-private sector partnership. it's a success story for bipartisanship because this is something that spanned 2 different administrations. There really are no bad guys in the story. So I think that spirit of positivity should continue. I think we too often try to turn these things into controversies or pit people against one another. I know every time I'm in the media, I get asked about something someone's doing. Is it bad or is it not bad? Like, everybody here wants the same thing. People who have questions about whether they should take the vaccine or not have legitimate questions. They deserve straight answers to those questions. I think what people tend to learn is that 140 million people have safely and effectively taken this vaccine, and it's made an enormous difference. I think what people see if they just look at the news, they look at India, they look at our own state of Michigan, they see that we have how it is still a major risk, even if you're under 50, even if you're under 30, because this disease can be quite random. So getting people the information we need, we absolutely should be creative about it. And I think the president is going to be interested in featuring more stories from the private sector because working age Americans are really the focus right now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kinds of other creative things companies come up with. Neil, coming to you. So Andy just talked about how some bigger businesses are incentivizing their employees and also their customers. But we know, of course, that the vast majority of employers in the United States are small businesses. So can you talk more about the small business angle, why it's important for small businesses to get their employees, to encourage their employees to get vaccinated, and how they might go about doing that if they don't have the resources to necessarily offer expensive incentives?
Yeah, well, Jeanette, I mean, you set it up in the lead here. You know, half of Americans work for small businesses, and you know, I grew up in my family's small business. It's a family, right? And you know, perhaps the most important voices as we try to help people get their questions answered are the voices of their family, both their biological family, the folks that the relationships that they've married into, but also their employer family, particularly on the small business front. So at the U.S. Chamber, we've been fortunate to interview small business owners who have done simple things that simply go employee to employee to say, what are your concerns? What information do you need? Are there logistical barriers? And helping them work through it on a person by person basis. You know, everyone's situation is different. People may have different questions. They may not know where to turn. They may have simple questions about how am I going to get there, and you know, how can I take time off? Employers can help answer all of those questions. And I think the most important thing we can say to every small business owner who is tuning in today is that you have a role to play in this. You have a leadership role, and you know, as you get vaccinated yourself, conveying that to your employees and to your community. You're a community leader, but also helping your employees navigate it. And so that can be everything from that simple bit of information or getting them on the right website in the state so that they can make their appointment at a vaccination site, to saying, hey, don't worry about it. Whenever your appointment comes up, go get your vaccination, and we're going to pay you. You're not going to have to take any time off. And for the employer, this tax credit that we talked about earlier means that you know that you're going to be made whole. So as Andy said, this is a win-win all around. Everyone's trying to do all that they can do. Let's just try to make it as easy as possible for everyone to get vaccinated.
Okay, thank you, Neil. So Andy, you alluded to this before. You know, there is vaccine hesitancy, and the businesses that are finding success are businesses that are offering incentives and encouragement to their employees. There's also an angle where you could require your employees to be vaccinated, but a lot of businesses don't want to do that. So where is the line between encouraging and requiring? And what are some best practices you've seen or heard about that businesses can use in terms of messaging to their employees? Like, what is the kind of messaging businesses can give to their employees to say, look, here's why it's really important that you do this?
Well, look, I think businesses will define for themselves based on their culture, the nature of their work, the relationship with customers, how much risk exposure they think people are having, what policies they want to implement. But certainly, talking to people about vaccines, making sure they get their questions answered, not on Facebook, but from legitimate sources, from their local doctor, with information that's reliable, is really important. Allowing them to talk to other people who've been vaccinated. Maybe they're fearful that they're going to have some bad side effect or something. And so talking to people who've been vaccinated really does help in those kinds of situations. So, I think, we talked a little bit about incentives and time off and so forth, but let's not lose sight of the fact that, for a lot of people, this is a big decision. They may be on the fence about it. They may be on the fence about it because they just don't view COVID-19 as a big threat. They may be on the fence about it because they may have questions about the vaccine. But we ought to treat those questions with respect. We ought to treat those people with respect. We ought to get them answers to the questions. The vast majority, I believe, will decide that this is a good decision to make. And we just got to make it convenient for people, reducing friction, giving people, that's why the incentives are helpful, because so they don't feel like they're losing something. They feel like they can, they don't have to miss work without getting paid, all of those sorts of things. So I think just a very respectful, fact-based conversation about this topic is, I think, the most important, most effective thing you can do. Understanding and listening to people. Someone says that they don't want to take a vaccine, and I would want to understand why. And then I wouldn't instantly delegitimize or label someone as being, vaccine hesitant. I would suggest that, let us help you get a reliable answer to that question. 90% of doctors plus have taken the vaccine. Generally speaking, if they ask their doctor or a doctor in the community what they think, they're going to get a good answer.
Great, thank you. Neil, I want to ask you the same question, and also Andy mentioned making it convenient. Have you seen, Neil, a lot of small businesses hosting vaccine clinics? Is that something small businesses can do? Can they partner with their local pharmacy to do that?
Well, the vaccine clinics are usually fairly large operations, so I'm not aware of smaller employers kind of offering on-site vaccinations. But we have heard of small employers who are trying to make it easy, particularly as vaccination slots open up at some of the mass vaccination sites, to say, okay, we're going to get our employees, we're going to take 2 days from now or whatever it is, and we're going to make it easy for that to happen. In other areas where it really is pharmacies that are on the front line, it's been small businesses making sure that their employees know which pharmacies in the area are offering the vaccine, how they can get an appointment, if they're eligible for walk-ups now. I got my vaccination at a walk-up just over 2 weeks ago. We heard that it was opening up. I was fortunate enough, the U.S. Chamber, I said, I got to go. I got a chance to get my vaccine, and I was able to take that time. That's what a lot of other small business employers are doing as well, just telling their employees, as soon as you have the opportunity, you go take care of it, and don't worry about taking time off or what it means in the workplace. The most important thing for your future and for our business's future and the economy's future is that we get as many people vaccinated. So there's lots of examples like that.
Yeah, and one thing I think for people who are afraid of the side effects of the vaccine and that it would mean taking off more time, this sort of addresses that, because it acknowledges from the beginning that the employee may need to be paid for more than just the time it takes to get the vaccine, which seems helpful.
Yeah, that's Jeanette, that's a really important point. I probably failed to emphasize that at the beginning, right? This tax credit that's eligible for small employers is both for the time you give your employees off to go get vaccinated, but also if they have a recovery period, you can continue to pay them during that recovery period, and you'll get reimbursed via this tax credit.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, one more question for you before we let you go. I know you're busy. I would love to just talk a little bit more broadly about the Biden administration's feelings and plans for small businesses. Can you tell us there's going to be a long recovery period for small businesses post-pandemic, years. So what in general is the administration thinking about in terms of other ways that they're going to be able to help small businesses in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, the president believes that small businesses are the center point of America. He believes that they are the center part of our recovery. And he also, I would just point out, personally has an affinity and relates very much to people who are operating small businesses across the country. You saw this when he came in and took the steps to ensure PPP loans were made available to small businesses and were focused on small businesses, and people weren't left out and left behind. And I think you'll see as he considers all of our policy steps that help the economy, that help build infrastructure, that help build families, that he is purposely making sure to define things in ways that help the little guy, as in all of us on a day-to-day basis, but also just not just large corporations, but that everything is designed with both small businesses and large in mind. And so I think you all have an important voice. The chamber is an enormously important voice. We were just talking before this call about some very important conversations we were having with you over the weekend about concerns that you all saw in the spread of the virus over the globe and in many other occasions. And I think this is an administration with people who I hope send a message that we want to listen, understand, work with, and kind of promote the activities that will help us all get back to normal life and help us all build our businesses and of course what that means for our families as well.
That's great. Thank you, Andy. I think that's a great place to leave it with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you'll come back and do this again with us at some point.
Thank you.
Take care. So Neil, you're going to stick around and you're going to do the audience Q&A with us. Before we do that, though, let's just remind the audience they can enter their questions in the right-hand side of the screen. And if you see a question published and you like it, hit the thumbs up button, because that helps us know which questions are the most popular and that we want to answer those because that will serve the most people. As a reminder, we receive a lot of questions during these events and we are working hard to get to them all. So just please be patient. Neil, I am back with you. Hello. It is my favorite time when we do our lightning round. So can you just walk me through? I'm going to do my items and tell me where we are. I was dying to ask Andy about PPP loans and whether they were going to consider extending them, but I didn't do that. So I'm going to ask you, where do things stand with PPP loans? Right now, they're open till May 31st, I think. Any idea whether they might extend that?
They are open until May 31st for loan applications. I don't anticipate another extension. I think we're probably at our last extension of PPP. And if there's anyone listening who's thinking about getting a PPP, either the first draw or the second draw, and you haven't done so yet, I would really encourage you not to wait till we get closer to that deadline. There is a possibility that they exhaust the funds that they have available for the program prior to that May 31st deadline. And so don't wait. If you think you're going to do it, go do it now. Get that application in.
And just as a reminder, if you haven't applied for a PPP loan, that is not something you apply directly through the SBA for, but through your bank or a lender. Neil, restaurant revitalization grants, where do things stand with those?
So this is that $28.6 billion grant program for the restaurant and catering industry. They are the SBA. This program, unlike the PPP, which is through your lender, this is a program through the SBA. The SBA is not currently accepting applications, though we're getting very close. Though, if you go to the SBA's website today, you can download their anticipated application form, along with all the requirements of what you will have to submit. So if you're a restaurant, don't wait until the formal opening. Go download the information they have, download the sample application form, and just start getting all of that information ready.
Great. Now, the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant, I think, was going to open today.
It did. In fact, right before we got on, I went to the SBA's website just to see if everything was working. I hit the Apply Now button. It gave me a timeline of how long it was in the queue, and how it would start processing through the application process. So just 45 minutes ago, I was on, and it seemed to be functioning.
Great, thank you. EIDL loans, economic injury disaster loans. Can you still apply for one of those?
You can, and remember, economic injury disaster loans are still available. And the administration announced, what was it, a little over a month or so ago now, that they were expanding the maximum eligible loan under that. It used to be 150. They announced it could go up to, in general, 500,000, although there's some exceptions and caveats there. They also announced that the administration would be contacting existing EIDL loan holders who are subject to that $150,000 limit for the process of getting potentially getting the higher loan amount.
And just a reminder that the EIDL loans have to be repaid, whereas your PPP loans could potentially be forgiven and turned into a grant, essentially, right, Neil?
That's exactly right. So, the restaurant revitalization, the shuttered venues, those are pure grants. The PPP is a loan that can be forgiven, so it effectively becomes a grant. EIDL, the disaster loan program, is a traditional loan. Now, it's a very low interest loan over up to 30 years, so it has favorable loan terms, but it's still a loan, it's still debt.
You know what time it is, Neil?
Audience time.
No, not yet. It's your favorite subject, employee retention tax.
Oh, yes. Excellent.
Your favorite, and I think the most confusing. So can you just remind everyone about the employee retention tax credit? It's still happening till the end of June, is that right? Till the end of the second quarter?
No, so now it's the end of the calendar year.
Oh,
so,
okay.
The bill that President Biden signed a little over a month and a half or so ago extended the employee retention tax credit for all 4 calendar quarters of 2021, so through the end of the year.
How easily could you explain to people who are listening who are like, I don't remember what that is, and this is too many initials and acronyms? Can you just tell them again what it is?
Yeah, so let's first start with who's eligible. Generally, if you have fewer than 500 employees and your business in a calendar quarter of 2021 is off by more than 20% relative to the same period in 2019, meaning you were open the first calendar quarter of 2021, but your business was off by more than 20% as a result of the pandemic. You still had expenses related to your payroll and your employee costs. Then for each employee, you can claim up to a $7,000 tax credit per quarter. That is a refundable tax credit straight to you. So, you have, let's say your business was off by, 40%, you still had 10 employees, you are eligible for up to each employee for up to $7,000 for each of those 10 employees, $70,000 for the first quarter of 2021. It is through the IRS, so you got to go to the IRS website. There's some forms. It is complicated. There's just no 2 ways around it. But it's also potentially real money.
It's a lot of money, right?
Yes. I mean, 10 employees, if your business is off by that much, it's real money. And just remember the old rule that said if you take a PPP loan, you
I think we lost Neil, and I'm here by myself. So I bet Neil's going to come back, and I think he was going to say that you can do both now, but we'll find out when he comes back. So audience, you keep typing in your questions, and we will wait and see if Neil comes back. I'm looking at some of the most popular questions now, and there you are, Neil. I was just about
I'm not sure what happened there. We're back.
I was going to start making up answers. So I was going to see what I actually did know the answers to, but I'm glad you're back because I didn't really want to do that. So I think you were making a point, and your point was about previously if you had the PPP loan and
you couldn't both get the PPP loan and take the employee retention tax credit. Now you can. You just can't take the PPP loan for the same payroll cost that you got the employee retention tax credit. So if you got a PPP loan last year, used to pay for payroll last year, take advantage of the employee retention tax credit this year if you meet that 20% reduction in revenue.
Great. And, I'm going to take a moment and plug CO, which is the publication I run for the Chamber, and say that we have articles about all of these programs on CO so that you can go there and read more about them. I'm going to take our first question. This person wants to know if their employees have already been vaccinated, can they still apply for this tax credit if they paid their employees for time off?
So this tax credit was effective, the expansion of the tax credit is effective April 1 of this year through the end of September. So if you provided paid time for your employees to get vaccinated after April 1st, clearly that's eligible. If you provided it pre April 1st, if you gave them time off for recovery, that actually might be eligible under the previous regime, but the actual time off to get vaccinated might not. But anything after April 1st, absolutely fair game. If before, it'll depend a little bit on why you actually provided the time.
Okay. This person says, can you take this on top of the employee retention tax credit? I think they were referring to the credit for paying your employees to get vaccinated. And I think the answer to that was yes. One has nothing to do with the other, right?
Well, so yes, but so you can take both, but you can't get, well, actually, yes, in this instance, because it's a payroll cost, there will be a slight offset at the end of the day, but it shouldn't, I can't imagine you would be in an employment situation where you'd have an employee making so little that it would offset the full value of it. So I suspect you're going to be okay. I take back my butt.
Okay.
I was going through the scenarios in my head to make sure you couldn't double dip, but it's almost impossible given the relative values of each.
Great. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this question, but I think it's an interesting one. So I'm curious if you do. This person is asking about, do they keep a copy of their employee's vaccine card in the employee's personnel file because it's medical related, but it's also like HIPAA would prevent them from keeping that kind of data on their employees? So thoughts?
Yeah, this is one where I'm going to tell you, make sure you consult either an HR professional, employment law professional. You're right, because you are both you're both dealing with medical records here, obviously subject to HIPAA, but employers also have the ability to ask their employees whether they've been vaccinated or not. So there's a little bit of both here, but you're going to want to make sure you're doing it in a way that respects your employees' privacy rights under HIPAA.
Actually, so I have a question. Could a company require their employees to be vaccinated if they wanted to?
Most of the legal guidance, with caveats for individuals who might have a religious objection to being vaccinated, but as a general matter, employers can require that employees be vaccinated. Whether they should or not, whether that's a good idea, is a different question. But from a legal standpoint, most of the legal scholars, most of the legal analysis conclude that you can, in fact, require employees to be vaccinated.
Yeah, because that would lead you to that person's question about whether you keep the documentation on file if you're requiring it. Speaking of religious reasons, this person said, is there any guidance for small businesses where almost half of our employees are refusing to take the vaccine due to religious reasons? That what they're really asking is, are they required? Okay, so I'm going to ask this question more broadly. If your employees refuse to get vaccinated, are you then required under the law to pay them if they are sick with COVID and can't work? Yeah,
so great question. Under the original Families First tax credits, the one we're talking about today is an expansion of that. Under the original law, small businesses with fewer than 500 employees were required to provide paid leave for employees who came down with COVID or needed to quarantine or who requested time off to care for a family member or their child. And they would get reimbursed via the tax credit. The mandate to offer that leave expired at the end of last year. So the mandate has gone away, but the tax credit that's available to you if you choose to provide that paid time off still exists. Now, importantly, some states have imposed their own requirements. So depending on where you live, you may be in a state in which you do have to still provide paid time off, but it'll be guided by state law, and in some instances local law, not federal law at this time.
Okay. Do 100% of the wages that you would have paid your employee qualify as being reimbursed, or is it just the taxes that you would have paid?
So it's the actual wages up to a cap of $511 per day. So if you have an employee who makes $600 a day, you can't get reimbursed for the full 600. You can only get reimbursed for, again, up to the 511. You claim that reimbursement against the payroll taxes that you're withholding. So the payroll tax, the tax relationship here, that's just the means by which the federal government is using to figure out how to reimburse you.
Right. Okay. I think that you already addressed this question, but just in case you didn't, is there an update on the EIDL loan extension that allows businesses to take out more than $150,000? I think you said they were contacting those businesses.
Yeah, and if you haven't been, reaching out to the SBA might be a good idea at this point. I honestly don't know where they are in that process and how far along they are, but the guidance that they put out was that they would be reaching out to eligible borrowers.
I like this question because we get a lot of very small businesses at these events where the owner is also the only employee.
Yep.
So if you are the owner of a business and went and got vaccinated and paid yourself, could you file for the tax credit for that?
Yeah, it generally applies to self-employed as well.
Okay. Can you get this vaccine tax credit if you have a PPP loan during the time period your employees were vaccinated? So I guess they're saying if you used PPP funds to pay your employees, can you then get reimbursed?
So you can't get reimbursed for the same expenses that you paid with your PPP proceeds. So, this may be a scenario in which you're going to want to think about, and you got to decide whether it's worth figuring out all the paperwork sides of this. But if you were paying, if I work for you and you are paying me today, April 26, with PPP proceeds, and I took 4 hours today to go get vaccinated, you can't also claim the tax credit for those same 4 hours. But if you were not using PPP proceeds to pay my payroll expenses today, then you would be able to take advantage of the tax credit.
Or as you like to say, no double dipping.
No, that is just a good general rule. No double dipping.
Especially during COVID.
Exactly.
This person is asking, okay, I like this. This is an interesting question. So this person is considering incentivizing their employees to get vaccinated by paying them $500 each. They think that amount would be enough to encourage a lot of employees to get vaccinated. But they're saying not all of their employees would. So it wouldn't be fair because everyone wouldn't be getting the $500. So do you think that's allowed to give a cash incentive like that?
As far we know employers who are doing that, who are providing an incentive for employees who get vaccinated. Different employers are approaching it differently. Some give the incentive in the form of paid time off on the theory that's maybe more equitable. Some are simply offering a straight up cash incentive like that. And yes, it's only eligible for those who do go and get vaccinated. So, the different people take different approaches based on how they think their workforce needs, but employers are taking lots of different approaches here.
So you left me with a question that I didn't have before. If your employees, I'll come back to it. Can you review for us? This person says, do I have to pay employees who had to stay home because they were in quarantine, even though they weren't the one that had COVID, like if a family member had COVID? And I know you said that was in the original law, that was true, but I think you said that expired. So where does that stand?
That's exactly right. So last year, if you were a small business, fewer than 500 employees, and you had an employee who was required based on medical providers' evidence, although most employers I don't think required that. So let's say that their spouse came down with COVID and they were quarantining. You did have to provide that paid time off for which you could receive this tax refund. That expired at the end of this year. So from a federal standpoint, you're not required, but do remember that some states have implemented similar requirements like that. So it just depends on where you live and understanding those state requirements.
Okay, I have a question that's kind of tricky. I'm going to try to ask it in a clear manner, but I think it's important. So if I offered my employees a cash incentive to get vaccinated, that's not something I would be reimbursed for by the government.
That's correct.
If I paid my employees to take the day and the next day if they needed to recover from the vaccine, if I paid them for the time they needed to get vaccinated, I could be reimbursed by the government.
That's exactly right.
But if I incentivized my employees by saying, in addition to your time off that you get vaccinated, I'm also going to give you 3 extra PTO days, that would or would not qualify as being reimbursable.
That would not be reimbursable under this tax credit. So this tax credit is tied to the time off that an employee needs to go get vaccinated and any of the recovery period. It has to be kind of COVID related. So if the employer is simply saying, my incentive to you is 3 personal days off at whenever you choose to take them, that is not a reimbursable expense under this tax credit.
I didn't think so, but I thought I'd just double check.
But I love the creative thinking that went into that. That I like that.
I also just want to push you a little bit on this question about the company that wanted to offer the cash incentive, because what you essentially said, so just make sure I'm summarizing it properly, is essentially if you're willing to offer the cash incentive to everyone, then everyone has an equal opportunity to claim it by getting vaccinated. So I'm going into a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but if you have an employee who comes to you and says, well, I can't get vaccinated because I have a medical condition, or I can't get vaccinated for religious reasons, I'm just wondering about what kind of liability a business would have in that situation.
Yeah, and here the details really do matter. And so, you'll want to confer with some of, one, you want to confer with your lawyers, you want to confer with your HR professionals on this. We do know that some companies have offered alternative ways of claiming whatever the bonus or the benefit is to that they're offering for vaccinations, but not all companies are doing that. You get into a little bit of a difference when you're talking about incentives versus restricting access. So a lot of what employers are dealing with now is, if we're returning to the office or if we're returning to travel, can I restrict travel to people who are vaccinated or entry to people who are vaccinated? In many instances, you can probably form a program that would allow you to do that. But again, the details matter here, and you do have to be concerned about potential discrimination claims. But broadly speaking, employers can provide broad-based incentives.
Okay. Just to confirm, this person says basically their employees work at night, and by then there are no evening vaccine appointments. And so they just want to confirm they probably won't be reimbursing people for the time it takes to get the vaccine. But if the person has side effects, that this tax credit can be used for the time they would need off for the side effects. And the answer to that is yes, correct?
Well, the answer to the latter part's definitely yes. That's not it's a fascinating point and exactly right. What do you do with folks on who work nights, and can you provide paid time off? I think my read of it is that you're not, if they're doing it on their own time after hours, then it's not paid time off. But I do think that that's an unfortunate situation, and I wish there was some way to fix that. But I think your answer is correct.
This person's asking about the second draw PPP loans. Do you know when forgiveness for that, I guess when filing for forgiveness for those might start, if it hasn't already?
Well, remember, your covered period was not less than 8 weeks before disbursement. So at a minimum, it's going to be 8 weeks after you've received your loan that you can even begin the process of concluding your covered period and filing for forgiveness.
What's the upper end of that time period?
Is it? Oh, you've stumped me. I used to remember this, and I've gotten.
I thought it was 24. But
I think that is right. It was 12, then it was 24, then it was the end of the year, and I think we are back to 24. I believe.
Okay, I got lucky on that. I was really just guessing.
I mean, we've changed that number so many times.
Yeah. Employee retention tax credit. Does it matter if the employee is full or part-time?
It will only affect obviously the total wages paid, but in short, no.
Okay. This person just put this in the chat for the whole group to see, but I'm mentioning it to you in case you have any thoughts on this. They said that their company partnered with their flu shot provider to hold an on-site vaccination clinic. So I just wonder, have you heard of other companies doing that? I know we talked about bigger companies have been doing that.
We've certainly heard of larger companies doing that. If a smaller company's done that, kudos to you. That is fantastic and wonderful. One of the things we are working on at the U.S. Chamber is that we think now that we're getting to the point where we have more vaccine available, that providing doses for flu shot providers, other medical providers who might come to a business location, either for the location to sponsor or for the medical provider to sponsor for those business locations, makes a lot of sense. And so I'm very pleased to hear that someone in the audience has done that, and we're going to continue to encourage that and hopefully make it easier.
This question, I think, is essentially saying they paid their employee in the past for COVID-related absence. I'm assuming they mean the person having had to have quarantined, or maybe having been sick. But they want to know if they've already exhausted their funds to pay the employee for either one of those two things, and then the employee gets vaccinated and needs time off for recovering from the vaccine, can they also get a tax credit for that?
Yeah, so there are cumulative limits on this tax credit that would kick in. So if you've provided up to 2 weeks of paid time off, you've provided the paid family leave that's available, and you've hit those top end limits, both on either days or dollar value of the reimbursement, you've probably hit the limit. There's not kind of an additional aspect to this. So if that's the situation with the employee, you've hit the caps, you've hit the caps.
Okay. This is another question that we've already answered, but I feel like because multiple people are asking it, it must still be confusing. So just to clarify, your tax credit that you would get is on the full wages that you would be paying your employee, not just on the taxes you would have been paying them. It's just that the tax part comes in because that's how you're going to claim the credit, is against your future payroll taxes. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So let's use this example. You employ me. You gave me a couple hours off to go get vaccinated. The value of what you paid me for those couple hours was $200. That is what you, my employer, are entitled to receive in reimbursement. So that's the amount you're due. Now the question is how do you get that amount you're due? The way the government is processing this is they say, hey, Mr. Employer, you remit payroll taxes on behalf of your employees. So if you owe your employee $200, you can simply count that $200 against your payroll taxes, and we'll square that up in your quarterly disbursements. You'll actually get to keep the $200 because you claim that, because you know that's an expense in which you receive that tax credit, and we true that up through this form 941 and show that rather than paying the federal government that payroll tax, you simply held on to that payroll tax.
This credit is only for small employers. Are large employers allowed to take these tax credits as well? What is the definition of small versus large? It's 500 or fewer employees, right?
500 or fewer. That's correct.
This is an interesting one. What documentation would you need to prove that the PTO was used for vaccination and recovery?
Yeah, I don't anticipate there's a lot of documentation here. So, this is the government's controlling this by limiting the dollar amounts and how you process this. So, you obviously in an audit, you would need to be able to substantiate any of those things. But this is, I don't anticipate that this is a lot of detailed documentation.
Okay, great. Does the employee retention tax credit apply to the small business owner and their spouse, assuming the spouse is an employee of the company, I guess?
There are some abilities for the self-employed to claim the credit. It works a little bit differently, and so I don't want to mislead you by getting the details wrong. But in general, there is a version of this that's applicable for someone who is self-employed.
Okay, this is an interesting one. This company uses a PEO to pay their employees, and so the PEO files their quarterly tax reports. So they want to know, can they still use the tax credit and have the PEO file it on their behalf?
We've been working very closely with a lot of PEOs. They are working night and day to figure out how they help their customers take advantage of this stuff. So I know they're working to make sure that that's possible. We've also been working to make sure that the government makes it easy for the PEOs to be able to help small businesses take advantage of this. So I would reach out to my PEO and just make sure that they're processing this, get the latest from them. But it is designed to be able to work with PEOs. But again, all of this is constantly changing. This is a little bit new, so we have to give a little bit of forbearance for folks as they're figuring out how to implement all of this.
Great. Back to the PPP. Can you go to a different lender for your second PPP than you did for your first?
Yes.
Vaccination tax credit. Do you know if it applies to businesses like in U.S. territories, like the U.S. Virgin Islands?
Well, if you're remitting payroll taxes, and I don't know of a reason it wouldn't if you're remitting payroll taxes. This is all triggered to payroll taxes remitted to the U.S. Treasury, but beyond that, I can't think of a reason. I've never been asked this question, so I'm trying to think of anything in the statute that would seem to limit that. But it would all go back to being tied into payroll taxes.
Great. We got a few questions on a slightly different topic about just grants in general. And someone asked, so we know there's the grants for restaurants, there's the grants for shuttered venues. This person asked about the transportation industry and the travel industry. Do you know of any programs that are in the works for those businesses, those industries?
Other than, there was a specific grant for basically a payroll reimbursement for the airline industry and some affiliated industries that kind of goes all the way back to the very original CARES Act. But for small businesses and transportation or tourism, no. The two dedicated grant programs are for shuttered venues and restaurants.
All right, Neil. I think that is all we have time for today. So thank you so much. Thanks also to Andy Slavitt for joining us from the White House. Neil, it's always great to have you, and I really appreciate your expertise on this, and I know the audience does too. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Jeanette. Thanks, everyone. It was great to be with you again. Special thanks to Andy and the White House team. And please let me just plug Co. There's lots of great resources there on all of these topics. So if you didn't get your notes down, if you're afraid you missed something, they have it there.
Thank you for that, Neil. And actually, for those of you who are looking for that, you can see that on the Watch Live page, the page where you're watching this event right now. You'll find more resources to help you through all of this. That's all we have time for. So thanks to our audience for joining us today. We're glad you were with us, and we'll see you for our next small business update.